What if the person you've been looking for your entire life was sleeping 6 inches away from you every single night, and you were too scared to admit it? Picture this: a tiny Chicago apartment, one broken couch, a pillow wall down the middle of a bed that was never meant to be shared, and 2 women who have been best friends for 8 years suddenly realizing that maybe, just maybe, friendship was never the right word for what they had. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it was just proximity. I told myself that the way my heart raced every time she laughed in the dark at 2 a.m. was just the result of too much wine and too little sleep. I was wrong. This is the story of how I let my best friend move into my apartment after the worst breakup of her life, and how, in doing so, I accidentally broke down every single wall I had ever built around my own heart. Stay with me, because what happens next, I never saw coming. Before we continue, if you love real emotional stories like this one, subscribe to the channel right now. Leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's build something beautiful together, one story at a time. I remember exactly where I was when Haley called me. It was a Thursday evening in late October, and Chicago was doing what Chicago does best that time of year: punishing you for ever thinking autumn was romantic. The wind off Lake Michigan had that specific cruelty to it, the kind that cuts right through your coat, like it has a personal grudge against you. I was walking home from the L train on Belmont, hood up, coffee in hand, counting the steps to my front door, when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Haley. I answered immediately. I always answered immediately when it was her. That's just how it had always been between us. 8 years of friendship had wired me that way. Her name on my screen and my thumb moved before my brain even processed the thought. Hey, what's... She was crying before I finished the sentence. Not the polite kind of crying either. Not the controlled, delicate sniffling that people do when they're trying to seem composed. This was the raw, ugly, gasping kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and terrible. From a place you don't usually let anyone see. He cheated on me, she managed, between breaths that sounded like they physically hurt her. 3 months, Madison. 3 months with someone from his office. I found out today. I went to his apartment to surprise him, and she was there. I stopped walking. Right there on Belmont Avenue, with the October wind howling around the corner of a bar I'd been to 100 times, I stopped completely still on the sidewalk and felt something cold and heavy settle in my chest. Not for myself, for her. Haley had been with Derek for 2 years. 2 years of weekend trips to Wisconsin, of dinner parties where I'd sat across the table from them both and smiled and told myself the mild discomfort I always felt around Derek was just me being protective of my friend. 2 years of her sending me photos of them at Millennium Park, at Cubs games, at his sister's wedding in Springfield last summer, and me liking every single one while sitting alone in my apartment feeling something I refused to name. "Where are you right now?" I asked. "I'm in my car," she whispered. "Outside his building. I've been sitting here for an hour. I don't know where to go." I didn't hesitate. "You come here," I said. "You come to me. Right now. Madison, your apartment is so small. I can't just..." "Haley." My voice was firm, the way it gets when I've already made up my mind, and no argument in the world is going to change it. "Get in that car, drive to my apartment, and come upstairs. I'll have the couch ready. I'll order Thai food. I have that bottle of Cabernet you've been eyeing since August. Come here." There was a long pause. I heard her breathe, shaky and slow, like someone learning how to breathe again after being underwater. "Okay," she finally said. "Okay, I'm coming." She arrived 45 minutes later, standing in my doorway with a duffel bag over one shoulder and mascara tracked down both cheeks, wearing the oversized Northwestern sweatshirt she'd had since college, and looking so heartbroken and so beautiful at the same time that it took me a full 3 seconds to remember how to move my legs and pull her into a hug. She collapsed into me completely. All 5 feet 4 inches of her just folded into my arms like a building coming down, and I held her tight. Tighter than you hold a friend, I think. But I didn't think about that then. I just held her and let her cry into the shoulder of my coat and told her it was going to be okay. It was going to be okay. She was going to be okay. I meant every word. The Thai food arrived. The wine got opened. We sat on the floor in my living room. Because the couch, as I discovered the moment I tried to make it up for her, had developed a structural problem somewhere in its middle cushion that caused it to slope dramatically to the right, making it effectively unusable as a sleeping surface for any human being with a spine. "The couch is broken," I announced, standing over it with a throw pillow in my hand and an expression of genuine betrayal on my face. Haley looked up from her glass of wine. Her eyes were still swollen, but the corner of her mouth twitched. "How long has it been broken?" "I genuinely don't know. I never sit on it." She laughed, small and surprised and a little wet, like a laugh that sneaks out when you're not expecting it. It was the best sound I'd heard all evening. "So what's the plan?" she asked. I looked at the couch. I looked at my bedroom door. I looked at Haley sitting cross-legged on my floor in her college sweatshirt with wine in her hand and heartbreak in her eyes, and I made the only decision that made any sense. "We share the bed," I said. "It's a queen. There's plenty of room. It's fine." She blinked. "Are you sure?" "It's fine," I repeated. "It's completely fine." And I believed that. I genuinely believed that. I had absolutely no idea what I was agreeing to. We talked until well past midnight, stretched out on opposite sides of my bed with a decorative pillow propped between us as a symbolic border. Haley's idea, which I agreed to with a casual shrug that I hoped looked like indifference. She told me everything, about finding the text on Derek's phone 2 weeks ago and convincing herself she was overreacting, about the way he'd looked at her when she walked into his apartment today, not guilty or ashamed, but just tired, like she was an inconvenience he was relieved to have resolved. About 2 years of making herself smaller, quieter, easier, and realizing tonight that she had done all of that for someone who had never even noticed. I listened to every word. I looked at the ceiling in the dark, and I listened. And somewhere around 1 a.m., when Haley had drifted into something between talking and sleeping, her voice going soft and slow and finally quiet, I lay there in the dark and thought about how natural this felt. Her presence in this apartment, in this room, in this specific amount of proximity. And I told myself it felt natural because we were best friends. Because 8 years of friendship creates that kind of comfort. Because that was all this was. I fell asleep telling myself that. I almost convinced myself it was true. By the end of the first week, we had a system. I am, by nature, a morning person. Or more precisely, I am a person who has trained myself into being a morning person through sheer stubbornness and an aggressive relationship with my alarm clock. I work in urban planning for the city of Chicago, which means early meetings, long days, and a professional culture that rewards people who look like they've had their life together since 6 a.m. I wake up at 5:30, run 3 miles along the lakefront trail regardless of weather, come home, shower, and have coffee ready by 7. Haley is a graphic designer who works remotely for an agency in New York, which means her professional life operates on Eastern time, but her personal rhythms operate on something closer to musician in residency time. She emerges from sleep gradually and resentfully, like a cat being removed from a warm patch of sunlight. She drinks her coffee in stages. She speaks in full sentences only after the second cup. Under any objective analysis, we should have driven each other insane within 72 hours. Instead, we found a rhythm. I learned to make the coffee before she woke up and leave her mug on the counter with exactly 1 sugar. No more, no less. The way she'd been taking it for as long as I'd known her. She learned to keep her nighttime creative spirals, the hours between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., when her best ideas apparently attacked her like a mob, quiet enough that I could still sleep, earbuds in at her laptop at the kitchen table while I lay in the darkened bedroom, aware of her presence in the apartment the way you're aware of a fire in another room. Not uncomfortable. Just there. Warm. She'd been living with me for 9 days when she got the call from her old college roommate, Priya, offering her the spare bedroom in Wicker Park at a rent that was frankly criminal compared to what she'd been paying in Lincoln Park with Derek. She told me about it on a Wednesday evening, standing in my kitchen in an oversized gray t-shirt and the kind of expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. "It's a good deal," she said, turning her mug in circles on the counter. "Priya's amazing. I've always liked her apartment." "That's great," I said. "Yeah. When would you move in?" She said 1st of November, so like 3 weeks. "That's great," I said again. There was a pause. Haley looked at me. I looked at my coffee. "You keep saying great," she said. "Because it is," I said. "It's a great opportunity. You'll have your own space. You need that right now." "Right," she said. "Yeah." She moved the mug in another slow circle. Only if it's not completely insane, would you want me to just stay here for a little longer? I could pay rent, actual rent, not just buying groceries and hoping that covers it. I looked up. She was looking at the counter, not at me, which meant she was nervous. Haley looks at the counter when she's nervous. She has done this for 8 years, and she has no idea that I know it. "You want to stay?" I said. "Only if you want me to," she said quickly. "Obviously, I don't want to. It's your apartment, Madison. You didn't sign up for a roommate." "Stay," I said. She looked up. "Stay," I said again. "Call Priya. Tell her you found something else. We'll figure out the rent thing. Stay." The smile that crossed her face in that moment did something to my chest that I categorized immediately as heartburn, and moved on from as efficiently as I could manage. She called Priya. She stayed. I told myself it was because she needed stability. I told myself it was because that's what friends do for each other. I told myself all of this with great conviction and zero acknowledgement of the fact that when she'd said, "Unless I just stay," something in me had relaxed. Suddenly, completely. Like a muscle I hadn't realized was clenched, finally letting go. The thing about lying to yourself is that it only works if you're consistent about it. You have to maintain the lie with the same energy you'd give a full-time job. You can't let yourself sit with anything too long. You can't look at things directly. I was extremely good at this. I had been practicing for years. But Haley's presence in my daily life had a way of slipping under all my defenses without asking permission. It was the small things, always the small things. The way she hummed while she worked, not loudly, just a low, absent-minded melody that I could hear faintly from the kitchen while I read on the couch. The way she'd started keeping my coffee mug in the front of the cabinet because she knew I was always running slightly late in the mornings. The way she fell asleep facing my side of the bed, even with the pillow wall between us, and I would wake sometimes in the early dark to find her there. Dark hair across the pillow, face soft and open in a way she never let herself look when she was awake and guarded, and I would lie there looking at the ceiling for a long time before I managed to fall back asleep. 3 weeks after Haley moved in, her ex-boyfriend Derek showed up. Not at the apartment. Derek didn't know where I lived, and I intended to keep it that way. He showed up at the coffee shop on Lincoln Avenue, where Haley and I had met for years on Saturday mornings. The corner booth by the window, our booth, the one the staff had stopped asking if we needed menus for because they already knew our order. We walked in together, shoulders touching in the doorway because the doorway was narrow, and November in Chicago had driven us both to wearing the largest coats currently available to women. And Derek was sitting at the counter, and he looked up, and the three of us went perfectly still for approximately 1 second before all of social law collapsed. He looked at Haley. He looked at me. He looked at the way we were standing close together, coats touching, coffee shop Saturday morning, and his expression shifted into something I can only describe as recalculation. "Haley," he said. His voice had that carefully composed quality of someone trying to seem like he hadn't been caught thinking something. "Derek," she said. Her voice was stone. "I didn't know you two were... I knew you were staying with..." He stopped, recalculated again. "Are you two... together?" I don't know what happened. I genuinely do not have a complete psychological account of what occurred in my brain in the 3 seconds between Derek asking that question and my response. What I know is that Haley's hand had found mine, her fingers threading through mine with a grip that was specifically calibrated to communicate, "Please go with this." And I looked at Derek across the coffee shop with 8 years of quiet, unnamed, carefully managed feeling sitting in my chest, and I said, "Yeah, we are." Haley's grip tightened. Derek blinked. Something moved across his face, something complicated that I chose not to analyze. "Oh," he said. Okay, that's okay." We walked to our booth. We sat down. The waitress brought our coffees without being asked. And Haley and I sat across from each other in our corner booth with our hands still loosely linked on the table between us. And she looked at me with an expression I had never quite seen on her face before. Something between terror and wonder and a question she didn't know how to ask out loud. And I looked back at her, and felt the lie settle into my bones like it was trying to find out if it was actually a lie at all. "Thank you," she whispered. "Of course," I said. Outside the window, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall on Lincoln Avenue, soft and quiet, and indifferent to the fact that everything had just changed. The problem with pretending to be in love with your best friend is that it requires you to pay very close attention to your best friend, which, in my case, was the problem. I had spent 8 years cultivating a careful, deliberate, expertly maintained level of not looking too closely at the way I felt about Haley. I had turned not looking into an art form. I had framed and hung and displayed not looking in the gallery of my emotional life with considerable pride. I was, I told myself, a mature adult who understood the difference between deep friendship and something more complicated, and who had chosen, wisely and definitively, to live on the correct side of that line. The fake relationship destroyed that completely, because now I had a reason to pay attention. Now, when Haley slipped her hand into mine walking down Michigan Avenue because we'd run into someone she knew, I had context for the touch. Now, when she leaned into my shoulder in the back of an Uber to a dinner party in Pilsen and said, "We should probably coordinate our story a little." And I turned my head and found her face about 4 inches from mine. I had a role to play that required me to notice. Really notice. The particular shade of dark brown her eyes were in that light. The small scar above her left eyebrow from a soccer game in 9th grade. The way she smelled like cedar, and something warmer that I had never managed to identify. "Our story," I repeated, because my brain had briefly stopped processing language. Like, how long we've been together, people are going to ask. Right. How long? She thought about it, mouth pressed to one side in the way it does when she's genuinely considering something. 6 months? Long enough that it's not weird, not so long that it's weird that nobody knew. 6 months, I agreed. And how did we... She paused, a small smile. How did we get together? What's our story? I looked at her in the back of that Uber, streetlights sliding across her face through the window, and I thought about how easy it would be to tell the truth. To say, "You called me on a Thursday in October, and I answered before the first ring had finished, and I think maybe that's when I knew, if I'm being honest. And I have been not being honest about it for longer than I can tell you." Instead, I said, "You made me coffee one morning, and you got it exactly right on the first try. Without asking. You just knew." She looked at me for a moment. That actually happened. I know, I said. Best lies are the ones that did. She was quiet for the rest of the ride. I looked out the other window and focused very deliberately on not thinking about anything at all. The dinner party in Pilsen was hosted by my colleague Nadia, who had an enormous loft apartment near the Blue Line and a talent for gathering rooms full of interesting, curious, moderately intrusive people who asked excellent questions. Within 20 minutes of our arrival, we had been separately interviewed, together, interviewed, and assessed by approximately 6 different people, all of whom seemed genuinely delighted by the information. Nadia cornered me in the kitchen, while Haley was deep in a conversation about typography with someone near the bookshelf. She's incredible, Nadia said, handing me a glass of wine with the satisfied expression of someone who has been right about something for a long time. I always thought you two were... every time you talked about her, Madison. What? Every time you talked about her, something in your voice. I always thought... She shrugged, smiling. Anyway, I'm happy for you. She seems like exactly what you need. I looked across the apartment at Haley. She was laughing at something the typography person had said, her head tilted back slightly, genuinely delighted. She had her arms crossed in front of her chest, in that way she does when she's comfortable, but still slightly guarded. The specific Haley posture I'd memorized so long ago I couldn't remember learning it. She was wearing a deep burgundy blouse and her hair was down, and she was, objectively and unmistakably, the most beautiful person in the room. Yeah, I heard myself say. She is. Nadia smiled and moved away, and I stood there holding my wine and letting the truth of what I'd just said land on me slowly, the way snow lands, softly, without making a sound, accumulating quietly until you look down and realize everything is covered. We walked home that night because Haley wanted to walk, and Chicago at night in November is not a city that invites walking. But Haley said the cold felt clean, and I agreed, because I would have agreed to essentially anything she said in that particular moment. We walked up Halsted with our shoulders pressed together against the wind, and she put her arm through mine, with the casual ease of someone who has forgotten there is any boundary between friendship and something else. And I let her. And I thought about Nadia's words, every time you talked about her. And I thought about 8 years of talking about her, of describing her to people, of building her in words for anyone who would listen. And I thought, maybe the lie isn't what happens when I say we're together. Maybe the lie is everything I said before. We got home. We changed into pajamas on opposite sides of the room, backs turned to each other in the choreography we'd developed. Private, practical, deeply domestic. We got into bed. The pillow wall was there, slightly squashed from weeks of use, performing its symbolic function less and less convincingly. Today was nice, Haley said, into the ceiling. It was, I said. Your friends are great. They like you. A pause. Do you think we're getting too good at this? She asked. I considered the question with more seriousness than I let show. What do you mean? The fake couple thing. It's starting to feel, I don't know, familiar. I said nothing for a moment. Outside, the wind moved against the windows. Somewhere below us on Belmont, a cab honked twice. Is that a problem? I asked carefully. Another pause, longer this time. I don't know, she said. I think that might be the problem. Neither of us said anything after that. But I lay awake for a long time in the dark, 4 inches and 1 decorative pillow away from the only person I had been consistently, comprehensively, catastrophically dishonest with myself about for the better part of a decade, and I thought, something is ending. Not the friendship. I didn't believe it would be the friendship. But something. The careful architecture of not knowing, the comfortable pretense of not feeling. Something was ending, and I didn't know yet if what came after it would be terrifying or the best thing that had ever happened to me. I suspected, lying there in the dark, that it might be both. 3 weeks after the coffee shop and 12 days after the Pilsen dinner party, Haley kissed me by accident. That is what we agreed to call it, in the immediate 48 hours that followed, during which we both pretended with extraordinary commitment that nothing of consequence had occurred. We called it an accident, and we treated it with the careful neutrality you give a glass you've knocked over but managed to catch before it hit the floor. Immediate, wordless, mutual agreement to act as though the near miss hadn't happened. It was not an accident. Here is what happened. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind of late November Sunday that Chicago reserves for maximum atmospheric bleakness, pewter sky, dry cold, the particular gray light that flattens everything into a two-dimensional version of itself. We'd been in the apartment all day, which meant we'd been in each other's peripheral vision for approximately 7 hours, which meant we had done the kind of slow gravitational drift toward each other that only happens when you're both pretending very hard not to notice that you're doing it. She was on the couch, the broken couch, which we had reinforced with a strategically placed hardcover book under the compromised cushion, working on a design project on her laptop. I was in the kitchen, nominally making soup, actually standing at the counter reading something on my phone and aware of her the way you're aware of something bright in your peripheral vision that you keep choosing not to look directly at. She called my name. Not urgently, just my name, in her normal register, the 2 syllables she's been saying my whole life. I walked into the living room. She had turned on the couch to show me her screen, a layout she was stuck on, wanting a second opinion, the kind of low-stakes creative question that we'd been giving each other opinions on for years. I sat down next to her on the couch, close enough to see the screen, and she leaned toward me to point at something, explaining. And I leaned toward her to look, and somewhere in the geometry of 2 people leaning toward the same small screen at the same moment, the distance between us collapsed in a way that was extremely surprising for approximately 0 seconds. She stopped talking. We were very close. The kind of close where you can feel the warmth of another person before you've actually touched them. I looked at her. She looked at me, and then she kissed me. Not long, not dramatic in the way you'd build it up, thinking about it afterward. Just present. Her mouth against mine, soft and deliberate in a way that had nothing accidental about it. For approximately 4 full seconds, I forgot my name, my address, and every careful lie I'd ever constructed about how I felt about her. Then she pulled back. "Sorry," she said immediately. Her voice had that specific quality of someone who has just done something they can't unhear themselves doing. It's okay," I said. "That was an accident," she said. Something in me, the honest part, the part that had been trying to get a word in edgewise for approximately 8 years, wanted to say, "No, it wasn't. Nothing about that was an accident, Haley. You have been one of the most deliberate, considered intentional people I have ever known since the day we met, and that was not an accident, and we both know it, and I think we should stop lying to each other before we waste any more time." What I said was, "Of course. No worries." She went back to her laptop. I went back to the kitchen. The soup boiled over, but something had shifted, irretrievably, completely, like a fault line that has finally moved. You can't unmove a fault line. The ground remembers what it has done, even if no one is talking about it. We spent the next 2 days in the performance of complete normalcy. We had coffee in the morning. We watched a documentary about deep-sea fish on Tuesday night that neither of us can tell you a single fact about, because we were both watching the television with our full attention in the focused way of people not looking at each other. We said, "Good night," with the cheerful neutrality of coworkers leaving the office. And then Wednesday night, it broke. I was at the kitchen table with city planning documents spread around my laptop when Haley came out of the bedroom in pajamas, poured herself a glass of water, and stood at the sink for a long moment with her back to me. "I haven't been sleeping," she said. "I know," I said. "I can tell." It's because I keep thinking about Sunday. I set my pen down, and I keep telling myself it was an accident, she said, still facing the sink. But the thing is, Madison, I think about you all the time. I think about you when I'm working, and when I'm falling asleep, and when something funny happens. I think about telling you specifically before I even think about putting it on my phone. I think about you. And I don't know what to do with that because you're my best friend, and you have been for 8 years, and I can't afford to lose that. I literally cannot afford. Haley. She stopped. She turned around. Her eyes were bright in that specific way they get when she's been holding something in for too long, and it's starting to push back. I stood up from the table and walked across the kitchen and stopped about a foot away from her and looked at her directly. No peripheral vision, no careful not looking, no diplomatic oblique angle. And I said, I think about you too. She stared at me. All the time, I said. 8 years. I have been thinking about you for 8 years and calling it something it wasn't because I was terrified of this exact moment. And I'm still terrified. But I'm more terrified of you leaving this apartment and us going back to normal and me never... She closed the foot between us before I finished the sentence. This kiss was nothing like an accident. December arrived in Chicago the way it always does, with a kind of theatrical commitment to being cold that manages to be both miserable and beautiful. The city reinventing itself under strings of lights, and the particular hushed quality that snow lends to even the loudest streets. I walked to work differently that December. I'm aware of how absurd that sounds, and I say it anyway because it's true. The lakefront trail at 6 a.m. with the temperature at 12 degrees, and the wind off the water constructing its usual argument against human occupation of the outdoors. I walked it differently. Something in my body had reorganized itself. Some low, constant tension that I had carried so long I'd stopped recognizing it as tension had simply released. Like a sound you'd been hearing for so long, you no longer consciously heard it. And then it stopped, and the silence was extraordinary. We didn't rush anything. That, I think, is what I'm most proud of, what I'm most grateful for. We could have rushed. There was an argument for rushing, for making up for 8 years of hesitation with immediate comprehensive commitment. But we didn't. We took it slowly and deliberately, the way you approach something you want to get exactly right because the stakes are too high to be careless with. We went on an actual first date on December 7th, a Saturday, cold and clear, the kind of Chicago winter day where the sky is so blue it looks false. I took her to the restaurant on Randolph Street that I'd been to once for a work dinner, and had spent the entire meal thinking about how much she would love it. We sat across from each other at a real table with candles and menus, and it was the most nervous I'd been in a decade, and it was wonderful. She wore her hair up. I noticed immediately and said nothing and thought about it for the rest of the night. Over the risotto, she told me, I started realizing something was different about 3 months ago. Before Derek, before the breakup. I was at his apartment one night, and he was telling me something, and I realized I wasn't listening, because I was thinking about something you'd said that morning. Just some ordinary thing. And I thought, I should probably pay attention to what's happening here. Why didn't you? Because you were my best friend, she said simply. You were the most important thing. I wasn't going to risk the most important thing. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. You're still the most important thing, I said. That part didn't change. We just got honest about what it means. She turned her hand over beneath mine and held on. Christmas that year was the two of us and my sister Rachel and her husband in their apartment in Logan Square. A loud, messy, genuinely joyful evening of too much food and a gift exchange that devolved into the four of us playing a card game at the kitchen table until nearly midnight. Rachel pulled me aside in the kitchen at some point in the evening and looked at me with the specific expression of an older sister who is satisfied about something she has suspected for quite a long time. You look different, she said. Different how? Happy. She said it like it was a diagnosis. Actually happy, not the version of happy you've been doing. I didn't argue with her. Walking home that night, Haley and I, through the quiet streets of Logan Square past houses with their Christmas lights still on, the snow soft and undisturbed on the sidewalks, our breath making small clouds in the cold air. She stopped in front of a house with a particularly committed display of front yard lights and took my hand and stood there looking at it for a moment. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Always," I said. "I've been thinking about what I actually want. With my life, I mean, my work, my everything. And I think I spent so long making decisions based on what seemed reasonable or expected that I forgot I was allowed to actually want things." She paused. "You were the first person I stopped reasoning about. I didn't think this makes sense, or this is the right move. I just felt it, and then I couldn't not feel it." I looked at her in the light of someone else's Christmas decorations, and I thought about 8 years of friendship, and all the careful mathematics I'd done to keep myself on the acceptable side of a line that had always been, in retrospect, completely arbitrary. I thought about the broken couch and the pillow wall, and the Pilsen dinner party, and the kitchen at midnight, and the kiss that both of us had immediately insisted was accidental. I thought about all the time we had spent managing what we felt instead of just feeling it. "I know," I said. "Me too." She squeezed my hand. We kept walking. My apartment, when we got home, was the same apartment it had been for 3 years. The same galley kitchen, the same living room with the strategically reinforced broken couch, the same bedroom with the queen bed where we had been sleeping 6 inches apart for months with a decorative pillow between us as a border neither of us had ever truly respected. But it looked different to me now. Or maybe I looked at it differently. It looked like what it had become, the place where something true had finally been allowed to happen. Haley dropped her coat over the back of the couch and turned to look at me from across the room with an expression that was so openly, simply hurt. No guard, no careful management, no version of herself edited for palatability, that I felt the same thing I'd felt the night she'd stood in my kitchen and said, "I keep thinking about you." And I'd understood finally what I had been doing with the last 8 years. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I said. And that was it. That was the whole thing. 8 years of complication, and in the end it reduced down to something that simple. 2 people, 1 small apartment in Chicago December, the radiator clicking against the cold outside, and a warmth between us that had absolutely nothing to do with the heating system. I had spent so long afraid of what wanting her would cost me that I had completely failed to account for what it would give me. What it gave me was this: a life that felt like mine. A morning that felt like it was worth waking up for. A person whose presence in a room changed the quality of the air. A best friend who was also, finally, exactly what she had always been. The person I couldn't imagine building any version of my life without. The couch was still broken. We never got around to fixing it. We never needed to. And that's where Madison's story ends, or rather, where it truly begins. Not with a grand gesture or a perfect speech. Just 2 women, a cold Chicago night, and the courage to finally stop lying about the most honest thing they'd ever felt. The biggest risk she ever took wasn't opening the door to her apartment. It was opening the door to herself, and discovering that everything she'd been searching for had been sleeping 6 inches away from her all along. Thank you, truly, for listening all the way to the end. If this story moved you, here's the one thing I want you to take from it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop pretending you don't already know exactly what you want. The truth doesn't disappear because you look away from it. It just waits. Quietly, patiently, 6 inches away, until you're ready. If you made it here, you're exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. Subscribe, Leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from and come back, because there are more stories where this one came from. Every single one of them was made for you. Until next time, take care of yourself, be brave, and remember, the most important conversations are always the ones you keep almost having. God bless you. See you in the next story.